Konnichiwa, Jaya, nice day desu. So welcome to part 25 in our series in Conversation Japanese. And for this episode, what I wanted to do is instead of go over random words to increase vocabulary, I wanted to focus on more specific words that will help start creating sentences. So I wanted to start looking at the phrases used for the first person, second person, and third person point of view. And in this lesson, I wanted to focus on the first person, which is, of course, I or me. And the reason I want to spend a whole episode just on the first person is there's many different ways that you could actually say this in Japanese, and each depends upon who you are and the type of situation you're in. So I wanted to focus on this particular point of view just for this episode so that you would understand which one is most suited for your situation. Okay, so let's start with the three standard textbook phrases used in Japanese for I, and they are Watashi, Watashi, and Boku. And they go by the level of formality, with Watashi being the most formal, Watashi being slightly less formal, and Boku being the least formal by quite a bit. And also, Boku is almost exclusively used by men, whereas Watashi, although it can be used by both genders, slightly favors women, and then Watashi is somewhat universal to both genders. Okay, so starting with Watashi, it consists of four Japanese letters, which are the letters wa, the letter ta, the letter ku, and the letter shi. So if you put it together, it's Watakushi. 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 So it's pronounced Watakushi. And it is the most formal of the three phrases. And it's often used by people such as the senior citizens or even somebody, for example, 40 years or over, especially under formal situations such as if you were at work. However, it is not just exclusive to the elderly, and younger people, even down to their teens, will use this under formal situations. So, for example, if you were giving a speech to your entire school, if you were going to a job interview, if you were seeing some very formal people, such as having to talk with the police or the doctors or whoever, then even younger people will use the phrase watakushi. So yeah, under certain formal situations, younger people will use it. Under almost all situations, elderly people will use it. And then, of course, if you are under in environments such as a job or especially a white-collar working sort of job, then you will be using watakushi quite often. And as mentioned, it is universal. Men can use it as well as women. Now, in comparison, Watashi has three Japanese letters, and it's basically Watakushi with the letter ku taken out. So it's wa, ta, and shi. And if you put it together, it's Watashi. 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 Okay, so as mentioned, this is slightly less formal than Watakushi, but only slightly. And in fact, it's so slight that it's almost interchangeable. And for ladies, they may tend to favor Watashi over Watakushi because it has a slight tone of femininity to it. And ladies may favor that for that particular purpose. Now, for men, it doesn't particularly matter. It's a little bit less formal. And if you want to be overly formal, then you might want to say Watakushi. But overall, either way is fine. And if you have a hard time pronouncing Watakushi and Watashi is easier, then you may just want to go with this. And finally, for Boku, it consists of two Japanese letters. They are the letters Bo and the letter Ku. And if you recall, in our alphabet, there was no letter Bo in the alphabet. So what it is if you take the letter Ho from Hahifuheho and put two dots on it, the ho becomes bo. And so it's basically the letter ho with two dots, which becomes bo, and the letter ku. And if you put it together, it's boku. 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 And as mentioned, this is almost exclusively for men, and it's also exclusively for young men. So I should be saying boys. And anybody who's up to about age 25 can probably use this. Any older than that and would start sounding quite immature to be using this phrase, even if you're a man. And if you're a girl, then it's almost exclusively not used unless you were very much a tomboy and you wanted to be seen by your peers as one of the guys, basically a guy rather than a girl, then you might want to use the phrase boku rather than watashi or some of the other phrases that I'll mention later on. But yeah, overall, if you are a young boy, anywhere from age 3 when you can start talking all the way up to age 25, especially under informal circumstances, then you may be able to say boku. If you were under age 10, then almost exclusively, unless it's under very, very formal circumstances, it's okay to say boku. And you probably will say boku. If you start saying watashi or watakushi under normal circumstances and you're like 8 years old, then people might look at you and kind of think that you're creepy because you're very formal at that age. And so boku is a standard phrase for I if you are a young boy. Okay, so watakushi, watashi, and boku are the 3 standard textbook ways of saying I in Japanese. However, there are also some of the more less formal ways of saying I in Japanese, and they're often just as much used as the 3 standard methods. So although there are a lot of them, I'll give you at least a few that you may commonly hear in Japan. And they are the phrases uchi, ore, Atashi, and ware. And just like with the 3 standard methods, it all depends upon who you are and what sort of situation you're in when you use these phrases. So starting with the word uchi, it consists of 2 Japanese letters. They are the letters u and the letter chi. And if you put it together, you get uchi, uchi, uchi. And for anybody who has studied Japanese slightly, then you may think this is strange because you thought the word uchi meant house. And in fact, uchi does mean house. It's the word for house. However, it also has another meaning, which is the word for I or myself. And the difference is basically it uses a different character or kanji, although the sound is exactly the same. And so, yeah, you can use uchi for I or myself. And in fact, the formal meaning for uchi is more something of the order of inside rather than myself. And once again, if you study Japanese, you would think that this is strange because you would think it wasn't inside, the word for inside, naka. And in fact, that is true. The most generic word for inside would be naka. However, if there was a situation where you wanted to express something that was internal to yourself from the first person perspective, then sometimes you would use the phrase uchi rather than naka. And as an example, one of the more common phrases that you see almost anybody use in Japan, especially if you were a teenager and up, is something like my family, in which case the Japanese phrase will be uchi no kazoku, where uchi, of course, is my and kazoku is family. And so here, rather than saying watashi no kazoku or boku no kazoku or watashi no kazoku, a lot of people will say uchi no kazoku. And uchi is neither really formal or really informal. It's just one of those commonly used phrases that can stand in under certain situations where you want to express something that's somewhat internal to you. So if you were to say my girlfriend, uchi no kanojo, my boyfriend, uchi no kareshi, stuff, my car, uchi no kuruma, people may actually use uchi rather than watashi, watakushi, or boku. Next, we have the word ore, which consists of the 2 Japanese letters o and de. So if you remember how to say rarirurero, then you could say that. If you don't, it's not the R's rarirurero, and it's not the L's lalirurelo. And if you don't know how to pronounce rarirurero, then please go to lesson number 14. Anyway, it consists of the two letters O and re. And if you put it together, it's ore. 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 Again, not ole or ole, and not ore, but ore. Okay, and this is a very informal version. In fact, it goes way beyond informal. It's almost a roughed down version of I or me. And because it's a roughed down version, it's almost exclusively used by men, although there are very certain situations where women may use it, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And even for men, it's used under a situation where that sort of phrase would be more appropriate under the circumstances. So, for example, I mentioned that white-collar workers would use the phrase Watashi or Watashi. But blue-collar workers, especially in areas such as construction or manufacturing or something like that, they may actually use the word ore more often, because it's actually a lot more appropriate for that sort of environment. And so it's a lot more kind of a tough, masculine, rough sort of feeling that you get out of it. And if you want to say that, then if you want to express that, I should say, then this is actually quite useful. So, of course, younger boys would use this phrase amongst their peers, especially if they were in a situation after school, for example, or if you were in college and if you were with your friends and if you were at a bar, then you may rather use ore rather than boku, which sounds too soft or immature, and watashi or watakushi, which just sounds too formal for that sort of conversation. So men would often use ore for this sort of situation. Now, for women, they may use ore under a certain situation. If you were in a very rough sort of situation, so if you were a member of a girls' gang, for example, a biker gang or something like that, which in Japanese, if you were a skeban or something like that, then ore may actually turn out to be quite useful because of the fact that if you don't express yourself in a tough manner, you might get beat up pretty bad. So yeah, under those types of situations, it's ore. I would not expect any girls going from any of the English-speaking countries to Japan and expressing themselves in the beginning to be using this phrase anytime at all, because of the fact that it's just not commonly used in any sort of circumstance unless you are expressing almost a toughness where you're almost in a situation where you're trying to show that you're tough enough that you could get into a fight and may appropriately get into a fight. And so yeah, women may use ore, but it's under some very certain circumstances. And next you have the word Atashi, which consists of the three letters a, ta, and shi. So if you put it together, it's Atashi, 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 Atashi. And this may sound very much like Watashi, where wa is changed to a. And the reason this is here is because this is a very feminine way of saying Watashi. And so this is almost exclusively used by women, unless you're a man who wants to express your femininity, in which case a man may use Atashi so that people understand that you're trying to express femininity. However, it's almost the most generic standard way of saying I or me for women. And so even if you're a senior citizen or a girl who's maybe 7 years old, it's appropriate either way to say Atashi. And in fact, for young girls, it's almost the most exclusive way of saying Atashi. So if you're a Western or English speaker going to Japan for the first time, and if you're confused about all these different ways of saying I or me, when in doubt, well, if you're a girl, just go to Atashi. And finally, though you will probably never use this, But you may hear this in things like maybe old samurai movies or even recent samurai movies or something like that, or in the martial arts sort of animation or something like this. The word ware. And ware consists of two Japanese letters. They are the letters wa and re. And if you put it together, it's ware. 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 Again, re is from the rariru rero column of the alphabet. And it's, again, not R's as in rariru rero, and it's not L's as in lalilu lelo. So if you don't know how to pronounce rariru rero, again, please go to lesson number 14. Okay, so ware. Ware is kind of a very traditional way of saying me or myself or I. And it's not used at all in the modern Japanese phrase. Maybe you might hear it in some sort of martial arts sort of scenario, but overall, this is a very formal and very situational sort of phrase. And so, although you may not use it, you might again hear it in some sort of movie or something like that. So I'll leave this here. It's probably the least important out of all of them, but you may find that you'll run into this phrase sometime in the future. Oh, and as a little bit of trivia for anybody who might want to know, ware was also used almost as a slang for the expression you back in the old days. I think it was maybe in the 70s or so, in a gangster sort of way. So kind of like the Yakuza or gangs may have used ware in a very rude sort of tough guy situation where the person who you were saying it to, you didn't like all that much. It's probably not commonly known anymore, so you probably don't have to worry about that, but I just wanted to mention it as a final form of trivia. Okay, so to summarize, we had the three standard textbook way of saying I or me, which are watashi, watashi, and boku. And watashi and watashi are basically the formal ways of saying it, especially if you're somebody of older age. Boku is a more informal way of saying it for a boy, maybe all the way up to the age of about 25 or so. Uchi is a very situational sort of statement, and if you wanted to express something in yourself, it's not particularly informal, it's not particularly formal, and so under certain circumstances, uchi can be used. Ore is a very masculine, almost a tough sort of way of saying I or me. Under certain circumstances, such as if you were with your friends and if you're a guy and if you want to kind of express yourself in a masculine sort of way, then ore turns out to be good. On the other hand, Atashi is a very feminine way of saying I or me. And so if you're a lady or if you're a girl, Atashi turns out to be quite useful. Now, ware, as mentioned, is a very, again, situational. It's a very traditional way of saying I or me. You probably will never use it in Japan. And you may run into it under very unusual circumstances, such as if you're watching historical Japanese movie or documentary, or if you were in some sort of situational thing where the person who's saying it was kind of representing an old traditional Japanese person, such as if you were to go to samurai exhibition or Kyudo bow and arrow sort of exhibition. The person who might be saying it might say ware, but it's very situational even under that sort of circumstance. Anyway, so those are some of the ways of saying I or me. There's much more, such as kochira and oira and others, wai. But I figure that if you knew at least these, then you would be in a pretty good situation, no matter which gender and which age you are. Okay, so that wraps up this episode, and I hope you found it somewhat useful, and we'll continue on with Conversation Japanese in the future. If you have any comments, please post them in the comments section below. And it's a pleasure to make these videos for you. We hope you continue to join us in our Japanese adventure in our future. And until our next video, we wish you all the best. And as always, Jaya nice day. Sayonara.